This is the key to your new life. Without me.
You know that moment when you realize your entire life has been a carefully orchestrated lie? Mine came at my wife's 38th birthday party, watching her feed cake to another man while I stood in the corner like hired help. The Blackwood family estate sprawled across 3 acres of manicured perfection in Millfield's most exclusive neighborhood. Tonight, it hosted 200 of Julia's closest friends, people who'd never spoken my name without a sneer. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over designer gowns and tailored suits, while I nursed a whiskey and counted the minutes until I could escape. "Luke, darling, you look positively miserable." Sylvia Blackwood materialized beside me, her voice dripping with false concern. Julia's older sister had perfected the art of passive aggression over 4 decades of privilege. "Just admiring the decorations," I replied, gesturing at the ice sculptures and imported orchids. "Must have cost more than most people's cars." "Oh, you know Julia. She deserves only the best." Sylvia's smile sharpened. "Speaking of which, have you met Victor Leland? He's been such a wonderful friend to our family." I followed her gaze across the room to where my wife stood laughing with a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Victor Leland, hedge fund prince, charity board darling, and according to the whispered conversations I'd been overhearing all evening, Julia's former boyfriend from college. "They make such a handsome couple, don't they?" Sylvia continued, her words landing like surgical strikes. "Victor's been so supportive during Julia's difficult time." Difficult time? I kept my voice level, though my grip tightened on the whiskey glass. "Oh, you know, the stress of her career, the challenges in her personal life." Sylvia's eyes glittered with malicious pleasure. "A woman needs understanding, Luke. Someone who truly appreciates her worth." Across the room, Victor's hand lingered on Julia's lower back as he whispered something in her ear. She threw her head back and laughed, a genuine, joyful sound I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "Excuse me," I said, setting down my glass with deliberate care. I made my way through the crowd, nodding at acquaintances who looked through me like I was invisible. The security consulting business I'd built from nothing after leaving the Army apparently didn't buy respect in these circles, not like inherited wealth or trust fund billions. "Julia," I peered at my wife's elbow, noting how quickly she stepped away from Victor. "Mind if I steal the birthday girl for a moment?" Victor's smile was perfect. White teeth, warm eyes, and absolutely zero sincerity. "Luke Travers, right? I've heard so much about you. All good, I hope." "Of course." Victor's handshake was firm, practiced. "Julia tells me you're in security. Must be fascinating work." The dismissal in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. In his world, people like me were employees, not equals. "It has its moments," I said. "You'd be surprised how much people reveal when they think no one's watching." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, but his smile never wavered. "I'm sure. Well, I'll let you two have your moment. Julia, save me another dance." He melted back into the crowd, leaving me alone with my wife for the first time all evening. "You're being rude," Julia hissed, her perfect smile never faltering for the benefit of watching guests. "Am I? I was just trying to wish my wife happy birthday." "Your wife?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "When's the last time you acted like a husband, Luke? When's the last time you made me feel special? You mean like flying to Paris for your birthday last year? Or the surprise weekend in Napa the year before?" "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You've been distant for months, cold. Victor actually listens when I talk." Victor. I tasted the name like poison. How long has he been such a good listener? Julia's cheeks flushed. "He's a friend, Luke, something you might not understand, given how few you have." The words hit their mark. It was true. My circle had shrunk considerably since marrying into the Blackwood family. Old Army buddies felt out of place at charity galas, and Julia's crowd had made it clear I didn't belong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert Blackwood's voice boomed across the room as Julia's father tapped his champagne flute, "if I could have your attention for a moment." The crowd quieted, turning toward the makeshift stage where a small band had been playing jazz standards all evening. "Tonight, we celebrate my beautiful daughter Julia on her special day. But before we bring out the cake, I believe someone has a surprise for the birthday girl." All eyes turned to Victor, who stepped forward with a confident smile. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. Julia, Victor said, his voice carrying easily across the silent room. You've brought so much joy into my life these past few months. I wanted to do something special for your birthday. He gestured toward the French doors leading to the garden, which opened to reveal a string quartet positioned around a fountain that had been decorated with hundreds of white roses. The crowd murmured appreciatively as Victor offered Julia his arm. She glanced at me once, a look I couldn't quite read, before accepting and allowing him to escort her outside. I stood frozen as 200 people filed past me to witness whatever romantic gesture Victor had planned. The message was clear. I was a spectator at my own wife's seduction. Quite the production, a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Omar Hassan, my former army buddy and current business partner, holding 2 whiskey glasses. At 6'4", with the build of someone who still hit the gym every day, Omar had a way of making expensive suits look like tactical gear. What are you doing here? I asked, accepting the drink gratefully. Julia invited me. Said she wanted to make sure you had at least one friend here. Omar's dark eyes scanned the crowd flowing toward the garden. Thoughtful of her. Thoughtful. I drained half the whiskey in one gulp. That's one word for it. Through the French doors, I could see Victor leading Julia to the center of the quartet. The musicians began playing something classical and romantic while rose petals fell from hidden dispensers in the trees above. How long have you known? Omar asked quietly. Known what? Come on, Luke. I've seen you track insurgents through Fallujah. You think you missed the signs that your wife's cheating? The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could deny it, make excuses, pretend everything was fine. Instead, I found myself telling the truth. 2 months, maybe 3. I watched Julia dance with Victor while the crowd applauded. Started with late nights at the office and then weekend client meetings. Found hotel receipts in her purse last week. What are you going to do about it? Before I could answer, the music stopped, and Victor dropped to one knee in the center of the rose petal circle. The crowd gasped as he pulled out a small velvet box. This isn't a proposal, Victor announced, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. But it is a promise. Julia, you deserve someone who sees your true worth, someone who puts you first, always. He opened the box to reveal a diamond necklace that probably cost more than my car. Julia's hands flew to her mouth as he fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. The applause was thunderous. People wiped away tears and raised their glasses in toasts. Through it all, Julia never once looked in my direction. Luke. Omar's hand landed on my shoulder. Brother, we need to go. No. I set down my empty glass and straightened my tie. I'm the guest of honor's husband. It would be rude to leave before the cake. I walked through the crowd, ignoring the whispered conversations that stopped when people noticed me approaching. Julia and Victor were still embracing near the fountain, surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations. Beautiful ceremony, I said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. Very touching. Julia spun around, her face pale except for 2 bright spots of color on her cheeks. Luke, No need to explain. I understand completely. I smiled at Victor, who was watching me with the wariness of a man expecting violence. Victor, was it? That was quite a gesture. Thank you. His voice was cautious. I hope you don't mind. Mind? Why would I mind my wife receiving gifts from old friends? I let the emphasis on old hang in the air. Though I have to ask, how long have you two been renewing your friendship? The crowd around us had gone silent, sensing drama. Julia's eyes darted between Victor and me like a trapped animal. Luke, please, she whispered. Not here. No, this is perfect. All your friends are here to witness this special moment. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box. I have a gift too. Julia stared at the box like it might explode. Luke, what are you doing? Giving my wife a birthday present? Isn't that what husbands do? I handed her the box, noting how her hands trembled as she took it. The crowd pressed closer, expecting another romantic gesture to cap off the evening's entertainment. Julia unwrapped the box slowly, revealing a simple key inside. Well, it's the key to our safe deposit box, I explained to the confused audience. The one where we keep all our important documents, marriage certificate, insurance policies, bank account information. I paused, letting the words sink in. Divorce papers. The silence stretched like a held breath. Julia stared at the key, her face cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally terror. I filed this morning, I continued conversationally, irreconcilable differences. Though I suppose wife sleeping with her ex-boyfriend would have been more accurate. The crowd erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Julia's mouth moved soundlessly while Victor took a protective step forward. "Now wait just a minute," Victor began. "No, you wait." I turned to face him fully, letting him see the cold fury I'd been keeping leashed all evening. "You want her? You can have her, along with her credit card debt, her shopping habit, and her charming family." I looked back at Julia, who was clutching the key like a lifeline. "The papers are already filed, sweetheart. You'll be hearing from my lawyer Monday morning. I'm keeping the house, the business, and my self-respect. You can keep everything else." I started to walk away, then stopped and turned back to address the stunned crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It's been educational." I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "And, Victor, good luck. You're going to need it." The crowd parted as I walked back toward the house, their shocked whispers following me like a wake. Behind me, I heard Julia calling my name, but I didn't look back. Omar fell into step beside me as we reached the French doors. "Feel better?" he asked. "Ask me tomorrow," I said. "Tonight's just the opening act." The next morning found me in my home office, surrounded by the detritus of a 20-year marriage and nursing the mother of all hangovers. Divorce papers, bank statements, and photographs covered every surface while I methodically documented the dissolution of my life. My phone had been ringing since dawn. Reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of last night's drama, friends of Julia's demanding explanations, and lawyers circling like vultures. I'd turned it off after the 15th call and focused on the task at hand, making sure Julia's betrayal cost her everything. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Through the security monitor, I saw Omar standing on my front porch with coffee in what looked like a manila folder. "You look like heck," he said when I opened the door. "Feel worse." I accepted the coffee gratefully and led him into the office. "Please tell me you have good news." "Depends on your definition of good." Omar settled into the leather chair across from my desk and opened his folder. "I made some calls last night after you left. Turns out your wife and her boyfriend have been busy little bees." He spread out a series of photographs showing Julia and Victor at various restaurants, hotels, and social events over the past 3 months. The timestamps told a story of escalating intimacy, casual lunches becoming intimate dinners, business meetings becoming weekend getaways. "Where did you get these?" I asked, studying a particularly incriminating shot of them entering the Ritz-Carlton together. "I have friends in the private investigation business. Apparently, someone's been paying to have Julia followed for weeks." "Someone?" Omar's smile was grim. "That's where it gets interesting. The PI firm was hired by Mrs. Eleanor Leland, Victor's mother." I looked up from the photographs. His mother hired someone to follow Julia? Seems Mama Leland doesn't approve of her son's new girlfriend, especially one who's still married. Omar pulled out another set of documents. "Eleanor Leland is old money, Luke. We're talking generational wealth, social connections that go back to the Mayflower. She's not about to let some social climbing PR executive destroy her family's reputation." I studied the surveillance photos with new interest. If Victor's mother was already working against Julia, that opened up interesting possibilities. What else do we know about Victor? Leland Capital Management, founded by his grandfather in 1952. Victor's been running it for the past 15 years, specializing in high-risk investments for ultra-wealthy clients. Omar handed me a financial report. On paper, he's worth about $40 million. In reality, he's leveraged to the eyeballs and one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. So he needs money, desperately. And your wife just happens to be married to a man with a successful business and no prenup. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Julia's sudden interest in our finances, her questions about the business, her suggestions that I should diversify my investments through someone with more experience, meaning Victor. "They're not just having an affair," I said slowly. "They're planning to take me for everything I'm worth." "That would be my guess." Omar leaned back in his chair. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Finnegan's Bar on 5th Street at noon. Come alone. M." I showed the message to Omar, who frowned. "You know anyone with the initial M?" "Not that I can think of." I checked the time, 11:30, but I guess I'm about to find out. Finnegan's was the kind of dive bar that catered to day drinkers, and people who wanted to have conversations without being overheard. Dark wood, dim lighting, and a bartender who'd seen everything and remembered nothing. I arrived at noon to find a woman in her 30s nursing a beer at a corner table. She had short auburn hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of understated attractiveness that suggested she could blend into any crowd when necessary. "Luke Travers?" she asked as I approached. "Depends who's asking." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "My name's Maddie Chen. I'm a freelance journalist, and I think we can help each other." I remained standing. "I'm not talking to reporters. I'm not here as a reporter." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph of Julia and Victor kissing outside an expensive restaurant. "I'm here as someone who has information you need." Against my better judgment, I sat down. "What kind of information?" "The kind that proves your wife and her boyfriend have been planning this for months." Maddie slid a flash drive across the table. "Audio recordings, financial documents, email correspondence, everything you need to prove conspiracy to commit fraud." I picked up the flash drive, weighing it in my palm. "What's your angle? Why help me?" "Let's just say Victor Leland and I have history." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "He destroyed someone I cared about, and I've been waiting for the right moment to return the favor." "What's on here?" "Recordings from their hotel meetings. Julia discussing how to access your business accounts. Victor explaining how they can transfer assets without you noticing." Maddie finished her beer and stood up. "There's also evidence of other victims. Victor's made a career out of seducing wealthy women and draining them dry." She headed for the door, then paused and looked back. "One more thing, Luke. They're planning to move fast. Julia's meeting with a lawyer this afternoon to discuss claiming spousal misuse. She's going to try to get a restraining order and freeze your assets before you can protect them." The door swung shut behind her, leaving me alone with the flash drive and a growing sense of urgency. I drove straight to my office, a converted warehouse in the industrial district that housed Travers Security Consulting. The business I'd built from nothing after leaving the Army specialized in corporate security, background checks, and risk assessment for high-net-worth individuals. Ironic, considering how badly I'd miscalculated the risks in my own marriage. My assistant, Rebecca, looked up from her computer as I burst through the front door. "Luke, thank God you're here. Julia's been calling all morning, and there's a lawyer who says he needs to speak with you immediately." "Get Omar on the phone," I said, heading for my private office. "And transfer all our business accounts to the secondary bank. Do it now." Rebecca's eyes widened, but she nodded and reached for her phone. One thing I'd learned in the military was the importance of having people who followed orders without question when the situation went sideways. I locked my office door and plugged in Maddie's flash drive. What I found made my blood run cold. The first file was an audio recording dated 3 weeks ago. Julia's voice was crystal clear as she discussed my daily routine with Victor, noting when I was most likely to be out of the house and which security measures I'd installed. "He's paranoid about electronic surveillance," Julia said on the recording, "but he trusts me completely. I have access to all his passwords, his safe combinations, everything." Victor's response chilled me to the bone. "Perfect. Once we have him declared mentally unstable, you'll have power of attorney over all his assets. My contacts at the psychiatric facility can keep him sedated and confused for months if necessary." I sat back in my chair, processing the implications. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they were planning to have me committed to a mental institution. The next file contained email correspondence between Julia and a lawyer named Harrison Webb, discussing the best way to establish a pattern of erratic behavior that would support an involuntary commitment proceeding. Julia had been documenting every argument, every moment of stress, every time I'd raised my voice or seemed unstable. The final file was a financial analysis showing how Victor planned to liquidate my assets once he gained control. My business, my house, my investments, everything would be sold and the proceeds funneled through a series of shell companies before ending up in offshore accounts. My phone rang, startling me out of my dark thoughts. Omar's name appeared on the caller ID. "Please tell me you have good news," I answered. "Mixed bag. I moved all the business accounts like you asked, and I've put our lawyer on standby. But Luke, you need to know. Julia filed a police report this morning claiming you threatened her at the party last night. That's BS, and you know it. I know it, but the cops don't. They're issuing a warrant for your arrest on charges of domestic intimidation and harassment." Omar's voice was grim. You need to turn yourself in before they come looking for you. I looked at the flash drive containing evidence of Julia and Victor's conspiracy. Not yet, I need more time. Luke, don't do anything stupid. We can fight this in court. They're planning to have me committed, Omar. Locked up in a psychiatric facility while they steal everything I've worked for. I ejected the flash drive and slipped it into my pocket. I'm not going down without a fight. I hung up and grabbed my go bag from the office safe. Cash, fake ID, burner phone, and a heavy-duty tool I'd hoped never to use outside a firing range. If Julia and Victor wanted to play hardball, I'd show them what a real operator looked like. The warehouse had a back exit that led to an alley where I kept a motorcycle for exactly this kind of situation. As I fired up the engine, I could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. Time to disappear. The abandoned marina on the south side of town had been my bolt hole for 3 years, ever since I'd started planning for the possibility that my marriage might implode. An old fishing boat named Second Chance bobbed at the end of a rotting pier, looking like just another piece of waterfront decay. In reality, it was equipped with satellite internet, encrypted communications, and enough supplies to keep me off the grid for weeks. I'd been hiding out for 2 days, monitoring police scanners and watching news coverage of my violent outburst at Julia's birthday party. The story had grown in the telling. According to Channel 7, I'd threatened multiple guests and destroyed property before fleeing the scene. Julia played her part perfectly, appearing on camera with red-rimmed eyes to discuss her fear of her increasingly unstable husband. My burner phone buzzed with a text from Omar. Cops searched your house and office, found nothing. Julia's lawyer filed for emergency restraining order. Hearing scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. I typed back, let them have their hearing. I'll be ready. The flash drive Maddie had given me contained enough evidence to destroy both Julia and Victor. But I needed more than just recordings and emails. I needed to catch them in the act, force them to reveal their full plan while the cameras were rolling. My laptop chimed with an incoming message on an encrypted chat forum I used for business communications. The sender was listed as barmaid, Maddie Chen, using the same alias she'd probably used to infiltrate Victor's social circle. Your wife and her boyfriend are meeting tonight at the Grandview Hotel penthouse suite. They're celebrating early. Victor thinks you're finished. Thought you might want to crash the party. I stared at the message, wheels turning. The Grandview was Victor's home turf, a luxury hotel he'd invested in during better financial times. Security would be tight, and I'd be walking into a trap if I tried a direct approach. But I hadn't spent 15 years in military intelligence without learning a few tricks about infiltration. I spent the rest of the day preparing. A call to an old Army contact got me the hotel's security schematics and staff schedules. Another contact provided a catering uniform and fake ID that would get me past the front desk. By evening, I was ready to give Julia and Victor a surprise they'd never forget. The Grandview's service entrance was lightly guarded, staffed by minimum-wage security guards who barely glanced at my fake credentials. I wheeled a room service cart through the service corridors, following memorized routes to the penthouse elevator. The penthouse floor was quiet except for the soft jazz music drifting from Victor's suite. I positioned my cart outside the door and activated the recording equipment I'd hidden in the champagne bucket, then knocked. Room service? I called out in a slightly higher pitch than my normal voice. Victor opened the door wearing a silk bathrobe and an annoyed expression. I didn't order. He stopped mid-sentence when he recognized me. His face went through a series of expressions, surprise, fear, and finally calculation as he realized I was alone and apparently unarmed. Luke Travers, he said, stepping back to let me enter. This is unexpected. I'll bet. I pushed the cart into the suite's main room, noting the champagne glasses, scattered clothing, and Julia emerging from the bedroom in a hotel bathrobe. Luke! She clutched the robe closed, her face pale. What are you doing here? You're not supposed to... Not supposed to what? Visit my wife? I parked the cart near the window and turned to face them both. I thought we should have a conversation about our future together. Victor moved to position himself between Julia and me, his hand reaching for what was probably a panic button near the bar. Julia, call security. No need, I said, raising my hands to show they were empty. I just want to talk. Clear the air before tomorrow's hearing. You're violating the restraining order, Julia said, but her voice lacked conviction. I could have you arrested. You could try. I settled into one of Victor's expensive leather chairs, making myself comfortable. But first, why don't you tell me about your plans for my business? I'm curious how you thought you'd pull it off. Victor and Julia exchanged glances, and I could see them calculating whether to deny everything or try to brazen it out. I don't know what you're talking about, Victor said finally. Sure you do. The psychiatric commitment, the power of attorney, the offshore accounts. I smiled at their shocked expressions. Did you really think I'd be that easy to manipulate? Julia sank onto the couch, her face crumbling. Luke, please. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? You seduce your ex-boyfriend, convince him to help you steal my money, then have me locked up in a mental institution? I leaned forward, letting them see the cold fury in my eyes. What part of that plan was supposed to be different? Victor stepped forward, his chest puffing out in what was probably meant to be an intimidating display. You need to leave now, before I call the police. Go ahead, call them. I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. While you're at it, explain to them why you've been planning to commit fraud, conspiracy, and kidnapping. You can't prove anything, Victor said, but sweat was beading on his forehead. Can't I? I reached into the champagne bucket and pulled out a small recording device. Smile, Victor. You're on candid camera. The color drained from his face as he realized what I'd done. You son of a witch. That's illegal surveillance. Actually, it's not. You invited me into your home, and I'm a licensed private investigator. Everything you've said since I walked through that door is admissible in court. Julia was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Luke, please, I made a mistake. I was confused, lonely. You were greedy, I corrected. Both of you. You saw an easy mark and decided to take me for everything I was worth. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. But here's what you didn't count on. I'm not the same naive kid who married you 10 years ago. I've learned a few things about survival. What do you want? Victor asked quietly. I turned back to face them, and they both flinched at whatever they saw in my expression. I want you to confess, on camera, every detail of your plan, every crime you intended to commit. I picked up my phone and started the video recording. Do that, and I might consider letting you walk away from this. And if we don't? Victor's voice was barely a whisper. Then I release everything to the police, the media, and your investors. How long do you think Leland Capital will survive once word gets out that you're a con artist who preys on married women? Victor looked at Julia, who was sobbing into her hands. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Fine, he said. What do you want us to say? For the next hour, I recorded their full confession. Julia admitted to seducing Victor and providing him with access to my personal information. Victor detailed his plan to have me committed and liquidate my assets. They even revealed the names of their co-conspirators, the lawyer, the psychiatrist, the offshore banking contact. By the time we finished, I had enough evidence to destroy them both. There, Victor said when the recording ended. Are you satisfied? Getting there. I pocketed my phone and headed for the door. Oh, and Victor, you might want to check your investment accounts tomorrow. I had some friends look into your business practices, and I think the CC is going to be very interested in what they found. I left them sitting in their expensive suite, surrounded by the ruins of their conspiracy. The recording equipment and the champagne bucket would keep monitoring their conversation for another few hours, capturing whatever desperate plans they tried to hatch. As I rode the service elevator down to the parking garage, I allowed myself a small smile. Julia and Victor had played their hand, and now it was time for me to play mine. The real fireworks would start tomorrow at the restraining order hearing. I couldn't wait to see the looks on their faces when I presented my evidence to the judge. The courthouse buzzed with nervous energy as lawyers, defendants, and spectators filled the hallways outside Family Court Division C. I sat on a bench near the back, watching Julia and her legal team prepare for what they thought would be an easy victory. She'd dressed for the part, conservative navy suit, minimal makeup, the picture of a frightened wife seeking protection from her dangerous husband. Her lawyer, Harrison Webb, was everything I'd expected from his voice on the recordings. Expensive suit, perfect hair, and the kind of practiced sincerity that came from years of manipulating judges and juries. He was currently coaching Julia on her testimony, their heads bent together in whispered conversation. Victor sat 3 rows behind them, trying to look like a concerned friend rather than a co-conspirator. He'd cleaned up well for his court appearance, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting toward the exits. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison. The bailiff's announcement brought everyone to their feet as Judge Morrison entered the courtroom. She was in her 50s with silver hair and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of domestic dispute imaginable. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench. "We're here today for an emergency restraining order petition in the matter of Blackwood versus Travers. Counselor Webb, you may proceed." Webb stood and launched into his opening statement, painting me as an increasingly unstable individual who'd threatened his wife and her guests at a public gathering. He presented photographs from the birthday party, carefully cropped to show only the aftermath of my dramatic exit, not the context that had prompted it. "Your Honor," Webb said, his voice heavy with concern, "Mrs. Travers lives in constant fear of her husband's violent tendencies. Just 2 nights ago, he violated her privacy by breaking into her hotel room and threatening both her and a friend who was trying to comfort her." I had to admire the spin. Breaking into Victor's penthouse had become violating Julia's privacy, and their recorded confession was now just a friend providing comfort. "Mrs. Travers," Judge Morrison said, "please take the stand." Julia walked to the witness box with perfect composure, raising her right hand to be sworn in. For the next 20 minutes, she delivered a masterful performance, describing our marriage as a gradual descent into fear and intimidation. According to her testimony, I'd become increasingly paranoid and controlling, monitoring her communications and accusing her of infidelity without cause. "He threatened to destroy me," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Said he'd make sure I lost everything if I ever tried to leave him." "And the incident at your birthday party?" Webb prompted. "He humiliated me in front of 200 people, accused me of having an affair, threw around wild allegations about divorce papers." Julia's voice broke convincingly. "Then he cornered me and Victor at the hotel, demanding that we confess to crimes we never committed." "Objection," said my lawyer, Sarah Chen, Maddie's older sister and one of the best family law attorneys in the state. "The witness is testifying about events not covered in the petition." "Sustained," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Webb, please keep your questions focused on the restraining order request." Webb wrapped up Julia's testimony and called Victor as a character witness. Victor took the stand and described me as clearly unstable and potentially dangerous, claiming that I'd threatened him with physical violence during our hotel confrontation. "I fear for Julia's safety," Victor concluded, "and frankly for my own. Mr. Travers seems capable of anything." When Webb finished his presentation, Judge Morrison turned to my side of the courtroom. "Ms. Chen, does your client wish to respond to these allegations?" Sarah stood up with a confidence that made Julia shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Yes, Your Honor. We have evidence that will show this entire petition is based on fabricated allegations designed to cover up the petitioner's own criminal behavior." "That's a serious accusation, Counselor." "Yes, it is." Sarah walked to the evidence table and picked up a tablet computer. "Your Honor, I'd like to present audio and video recordings that prove Mrs. Travers and Mr. Leland have been engaged in a conspiracy to defraud my client of his assets and have him involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility." The courtroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Webb jumped to his feet, his face flushed. "Objection! Any recordings made without consent would be inadmissible." "Your Honor," Sarah interrupted smoothly, "these recordings were made by a licensed private investigator in the course of his duties, with the full knowledge and consent of both parties. Mr. Leland invited my client into his residence, and both he and Mrs. Travers voluntarily provided detailed confessions of their criminal conspiracy." Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Play the recording." The first audio file filled the courtroom, Julia's voice discussing my security measures and daily routine with Victor, followed by his chilling response about having me declared mentally unstable. The silence in the courtroom was absolute as the conspiracy unfolded in their own words. Julia's face had gone white as a sheet. Victor was staring at his hands, probably calculating how quickly he could flee the country. Webb was frantically shuffling through papers, trying to find some legal precedent that could save his clients. When the recording ended, Sarah played the video from Victor's penthouse, showing both Julia and Victor confessing to their plan in detail. By the time it finished, several spectators were openly staring at the defendants in disgust. Your Honor, Sarah said into the stunned silence, my client is clearly the victim here, not the perpetrator. Mrs. Travers and Mr. Leland have admitted to conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, and planning to have an innocent man involuntarily committed to cover up their crimes. Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of everyone involved. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. Mr. Webb, I've been on this bench for 15 years, and I've never seen such a blatant attempt to manipulate this court. Your clients have admitted under oath to crimes that could result in decades in prison. Your Honor, I had no knowledge. I'm sure you didn't, which is why I'm recommending that the State Bar investigate your client's screening procedures. Judge Morrison turned to Julia and Victor. As for you two, I'm denying the restraining order petition and referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. She banged her gavel once sharply. Court is adjourned. The courtroom exploded into chaos as reporters rushed toward Julia and Victor, shouting questions about their conspiracy. Webb was already heading for the exit, probably planning to file a motion to withdraw from the case before his reputation suffered any more damage. I sat quietly in my seat, watching Julia's world collapse around her. She was crying again. But these tears were real, the desperate sobs of someone who'd just lost everything. Victor tried to push through the crowd of reporters, but they followed him into the hallway, their cameras capturing every moment of his humiliation. Within hours, the footage would be on every news channel and social media platform in the city. Luke, Julia appeared at my side as the courtroom cleared, her face streaked with mascara. Please, we need to talk. I think you've said enough for one day. You don't understand. Victor made me do it. He said you'd never find out, that it would be quick and clean. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked down at her hand, then back at her tear-stained face. You wanted to have me locked up in a mental institution, Julia. You were going to steal everything I'd worked for and leave me sedated and helpless in a padded room. I was scared. You were always so cold, so distant. Victor made me feel special, wanted. Victor made you feel like a mark, I corrected, which is exactly what you were. I gently removed her hand from my arm and stood up. Goodbye, Julia. I hope prison gives you time to figure out who you really are. As I walked out of the courtroom, I could hear her calling my name, but I didn't look back. The woman I'd married was gone. Maybe she'd never existed in the first place. What was left was just another criminal waiting for sentencing. Outside the courthouse, Omar was waiting by his car with a bottle of champagne and a broad grin. How does it feel to be a free man? He asked. Ask me tomorrow, I said, accepting the bottle. As tonight, I just want to go home. But as we drove through the city streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Julia and Victor were finished, but they'd had help. Lawyers, doctors, financial contacts who'd been willing to participate in their scheme for the right price. I'd won this battle, but the war was just getting started. 3 weeks after the courthouse showdown, I was back in my office trying to rebuild a life that had been blown apart by betrayal. The media attention had been intense but brief. A few days of headlines about the birthday party conspiracy before the news cycle moved on to fresher scandals. Julia and Victor were both in jail awaiting trial on multiple felony charges. Their co-conspirators had been arrested in a coordinated sweep by the FBI, who'd taken a keen interest in Victor's offshore banking connections. The psychiatric facility that had agreed to hold me indefinitely was under federal investigation, and 3 doctors had already lost their licenses. My phone rang, interrupting my review of the morning's security reports. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Travers Security. Mr. Travers, this is Detective Maria Santos with the Fraud Division. I need to speak with you about the Leland case. What about it? We've uncovered some additional evidence that you need to see. Can you come to the station this afternoon? An hour later, I sat in Detective Santos's office looking at a wall covered with photographs, financial documents, and timeline charts. It looked like the kind of investigation board you'd see in a movie about serial butchers. Victor Leland has been running this scam for almost 10 years, Santos explained, pointing to a series of photos showing different women. You're victim number 7, but the first one who fought back. The photos told a depressing story. Wealthy women in their 30s and 40s, all recently divorced or widowed, all seduced by Victor's charm and apparent wealth. Some had lost their homes, others their children's college funds. One had taken her own life after losing her family's business to Victor's manipulations. Where are they now? I asked. Scattered across the country, mostly. Some are too ashamed to testify. Others are afraid of retaliation. Santos pulled out a thick folder. But your recordings have given us enough evidence to build cases for all of them. We're talking about $20 million in theft and fraud over the past decade. I studied the photos of Victor's victims, feeling a familiar anger building in my chest. These women had trusted him, believed his lies, and paid a terrible price for their faith in human decency. What do you need from me? Testify at his trial. Help us put him away for life. Santos leaned forward. You have a chance to make sure he never hurts anyone else. I'll do it. That evening, I met Omar and Sarah Chen at Finnegan's Bar to discuss the upcoming trials. The dive bar had become our unofficial headquarters, a place where we could talk freely without worrying about surveillance or eavesdropping. The prosecution is offering Julia a plea deal, Sarah said, sliding a legal document across the table. 5 years in minimum security if she testifies against Victor and provides information about his other victims. I scanned the document, noting the terms and conditions. What's your recommendation? Take it. Julia was a victim too, in her own way. Victor manipulated her just like he manipulated the others. Sarah finished her beer and signaled for another. Besides, the important thing is making sure Victor never gets out of prison. What about the civil suits? Omar asked. That's where things get interesting. Sarah smiled grimly. Victor's assets are being liquidated to pay restitution to his victims. His penthouse, his yacht, his art collection, everything's being sold at auction. Good. But here's the best part, Sarah continued. His mother, Eleanor Leland, has agreed to establish a victim compensation fund using the family trust. She's so horrified by what her son did that she's liquidating a century of accumulated wealth to make things right. I thought about the surveillance photos Omar had shown me weeks ago, evidence that Eleanor Leland had been investigating Julia long before I knew about the affair. She knew what kind of man he was. She suspected, but like a lot of wealthy families, she hoped he'd eventually straighten out and stop embarrassing the family name. Sarah shook her head. Now she's spending her final years trying to undo the damage he caused. Over the next 6 months, I testified at 3 separate trials. Victor was convicted on 14 counts of fraud and conspiracy, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Julia received her 5-year sentence and was transferred to a minimum security facility in upstate New York. The various doctors, lawyers, and financial advisors who'd helped them received sentences ranging from probation to 10 years in federal prison. The media coverage was extensive but fair, focusing on the victims rather than sensationalizing the crimes. Several of Victor's other victims found the courage to speak publicly about their experiences, helping to raise awareness about financial predators who target vulnerable women. My business thrived in the aftermath of the trials. Apparently, being the victim who'd fought back and won made me something of a celebrity in certain circles. Wealthy individuals and corporations hired Travers Security to protect them from the kind of elaborate cons that had nearly destroyed my life. But the real satisfaction came from the victim compensation fund that Eleanor Leland had established. Over the course of 2 years, it paid out nearly $50 million to Victor's victims, helping them rebuild their lives and recover from their trauma. I kept in touch with several of them, providing security advice and emotional support as they worked to trust again. It was rewarding work, helping people who'd been through experiences similar to my own. 1 year after the courthouse showdown, I received a letter from Julia. She was serving her sentence at a minimum security facility that looked more like a college campus than a prison, according to the photographs she'd included. Dear Luke, the letter began, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know how sorry I am for what I did to you. The counseling program here has helped me understand how Victor manipulated me. But that doesn't excuse my choices. I betrayed our marriage and tried to destroy your life out of greed and selfishness. I've been following the news about the Victim Compensation Fund and your work helping Victor's other victims. I'm proud of you for turning something so terrible into something positive. That's the man I fell in love with 10 years ago, before I lost sight of what really mattered. I don't expect you to write back or visit. I just wanted you to know that I'm grateful you stopped us before we could hurt anyone else. You saved me from becoming something even worse than I already was. I hope you find happiness, Luke, You deserve it more than anyone I know. With love and regret, Julia. I read the letter twice, then filed it away with the other documents from the case. Julia's apology was sincere, but it didn't change what she'd done or the consequences of her choices. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive, even when the betrayer had found redemption. That evening, I stood on the deck of my house, looking out over the city lights and thinking about the strange turns my life had taken. A year ago, I'd been a successful businessman trapped in a failing marriage, blind to the conspiracy forming around me. Tonight, I was a survivor who'd helped bring down a criminal network and protect other innocent victims. My phone buzzed with a text message from Omar. Dinner tomorrow? I want to discuss a new case. Tech executive thinks his business partner is planning to steal their AI patents. I smiled and typed back. Sounds familiar. I'll bring the recording equipment. Some things never changed. There would always be predators looking for easy marks, conspirators planning elaborate schemes, and innocent people who needed protection from those who would exploit their trust. But now I was ready for them. The guest of honor had learned to fight back.